Imagine a people vibrant and devout, who simply vanished from the face of the earth, not in some ancient, forgotten land, but right in the heart of medieval Europe. Their beliefs were considered so dangerous, so utterly reprehensible, that an entire system of terror was invented just to eradicate them. This wasn't just a persecution, it was a deliberate, systematic obliteration of an entire spiritual movement. Their homes were burned, their scriptures destroyed, their very memory targeted for erasure. The scale of this suppression is almost impossible to comprehend today. It involved kings, popes, crusades, and newly forged instruments of state control. Yet, despite this overwhelming force, whispers of their faith endured, hiding in plain sight. They posed a profound threat not just to dogma, but to the very fabric of power. But what exactly did they believe that justified such an extreme response? And real quick, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos. Now let's get started. The official church labeled them perfect heretics, a title dripping with both condemnation and a peculiar respect. This wasn't just a casual insult, it was a theological judgment of the highest order. They were seen not as misguided Christians, but as an existential threat to the church's authority and doctrine. Their teachings struck at the very core of what medieval Christianity understood about God, creation, and salvation. They challenged doctrines that had been cemented for centuries, questioning the fundamental nature of reality itself. This wasn't merely a disagreement on minor points. It was a complete reinterpretation that threatened to unravel the entire Christian worldview. The term perfect implies a sense of completion in their heresy, an internal consistency. It suggested they weren't just dabbling in false beliefs, but had constructed a fully formed alternative system. This made them particularly dangerous, as their arguments seemed coherent and compelling to many. While the church presented them as seducers of the faithful, their followers saw them as living examples of true spiritual dedication. This stark contrast between how the church viewed them and how they viewed themselves points to a deeper conflict. What were these radical ideas that earned them such a potent and ultimately fatal designation? We are about to uncover how these beliefs quietly spread across Europe, gaining traction in unexpected places. The unknown spread across Europe. Despite the intense opposition, the Cathar faith didn't just appear in one place and stay there. It spread with remarkable speed and secrecy. From the Languedoc region of southern France, their ideas seeped into northern Italy, parts of Germany, and even beyond. This expansion was not through grand crusades or official missions, but through quiet, personal conversions and networks of believers. Travelers, merchants, and even noble families carried the teachings with them, planting seeds in new territories. The resilience of this underground movement is truly astonishing. Imagine hushed meetings in hidden barns or whispered conversations in market squares, sharing a dangerous new understanding of God. This clandestine method of spreading their message made them incredibly difficult to track and suppress in the early stages. It also meant that variations in their beliefs began to emerge, adapting to local customs and questions. The mainstream church struggled to understand how these heretical notions could gain such a foothold. They saw it as demonic influence, but for many, it offered a compelling alternative to a powerful and often corrupt ecclesiastical structure. This widespread infiltration set the stage for a dramatic clash, especially concerning their unique understanding of divinity. What were the specific teachings that resonated with so many, particularly their idea of the gospel of the Spirit versus the gospel of flesh? At the heart of Cathar theology lay a fundamental distinction: the gospel of the Spirit versus the gospel of flesh. This wasn't just a rhetorical flourish, it epitomized their entire worldview. For the Cathars, the material world, this physical existence, was inherently flawed, a creation of a lesser, evil God. The gospel of flesh, therefore, represented the traditional Christian emphasis on rituals, sacraments, and the physical incarnation of Christ. They saw this as a misguided focus on the corruptible, ignoring the true spiritual essence. They believed the Church was trapped in this earthly delusion, binding people to a world from which they needed liberation. In contrast, the Gospel of the Spirit taught that salvation came through an awakening to the divine spark within every individual. This spark, they believed, was a piece of the good God trapped in the material body. Their goal was to purify this spark, allowing it to ascend back to its spiritual origin. They actively sought to transcend the physical realm entirely. This radical dualism, this stark division between good spirit and evil matter, informed every aspect of their lives and beliefs. It was a complete inversion of mainstream Christian thought, which held that God created both the spiritual and material worlds and deemed them good. This deep philosophical chasm led to their profoundly different practices and challenges, particularly regarding the concept of radical dualism, which few truly grasp. The radical dualism of the Cathars is arguably the most misunderstood aspect of their faith, yet it was its absolute cornerstone. They believed in two co-eternal principles: a good God of light and spirit, and an evil God of darkness and matter. This wasn't just a theological nuance, it was a cosmic battle playing out in every life. This evil God, they taught, was the creator of our physical world, including our bodies. Everything tangible, everything earthly, carried the taint of this malevolent force. The good God, in contrast, resided in a purely spiritual realm, untouched by corruption. Humanity, in their view, was a mixture, a divine spark of the good God trapped within a physical shell made by the evil God. This belief profoundly impacted their ethics and practices. Since the body and the material world were evil, they sought to minimize their engagement with them. They advocated for asceticism, fasting, and even suicide in extreme cases, seeing it as the ultimate escape from the prison of the flesh. The goal was to purify the spirit, preparing it for its return to the spiritual realm. Mainstream Christianity, on the other hand, held that while humanity was fallen, the physical creation itself was good, a gift from God. This fundamental disagreement meant there was no common ground, no possibility of reconciliation. This concept of radical dualism led directly to their rejection of some of Christianity's most sacred symbols and rituals, including the cross and the Eucharist. Given their radical dualism, it's no surprise that the Cathars fundamentally rejected central symbols and sacraments of the Catholic Church. The cross, for instance, was not a symbol of triumph and redemption to them. Instead, it represented the suffering and humiliation of Christ's physical body, a body they believed was merely an appearance, not truly flesh and blood. They viewed the cross as an instrument of torture, a symbol of the evil material world's dominion over the divine spirit. To venerate it would be to worship the very thing that trapped the good God in human form. This was considered blasphemous to the Church, but for Cathars, it was a logical extension of their beliefs. Similarly, the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, was rejected outright. The Church taught transubstantiation, the miraculous transformation of bread and wine into the literal body and blood of Jesus. But for Cathars, anything physical was inherently corrupt. To consume the flesh of Christ would be to engage with the evil material realm. They believed Christ's body was never truly physical, but a spiritual apparition. Therefore, the very idea of partaking in his physical essence was an impossible and even repulsive concept. These rejections were not minor heresies, they directly challenged the core of Christian worship and sacrament. Such profound differences hint at even deeper secrets, particularly regarding their own unique ritual, which held significant meaning. While they rejected traditional sacraments, the Cathars did have one central and sacred ritual: the consolamentum. This was not a casual ceremony, it was the spiritual baptism, the true initiation into their faith, and for the perfects, a lifelong commitment. The consolamentum involved the laying on of hands and was believed to transmit the Holy Spirit, cleansing the recipient of all sin. It was considered essential for salvation. For most believers, called credents, they would receive the consolamentum on their deathbed, ensuring their soul returned to the good God. But for those who committed to becoming perfects, it marked a complete severance from the world. Once a perfect, they embraced an extremely ascetic lifestyle, abstaining from meat, sex, and all worldly possessions. The consolamentum was often conducted in secret, performed by existing perfects in ceremonies shrouded from the eyes of the church. It symbolized a spiritual rebirth, a release from the cycle of reincarnation they believed trapped souls in material bodies. This ritual was their gateway to true liberation. It was their answer to confession, communion, and baptism, all rolled into one. The simplicity and spiritual intensity of the consolamentum revealed their profound focus on inner purity rather than external observance. It was a personal, transformative experience, not a communal public act. Yet, this secretive ritual also hints at another revolutionary aspect of their society, the surprising role of women as spiritual equals. One of the most radical, and therefore most threatening, aspects of Catharism was the elevated status of women within their faith. Unlike the mainstream church, which largely confined women to domestic roles or convents under male authority, Cathar women could become perfects. This meant they could receive the consolamentum, preach, teach, and administer the solitary sacrament. They were seen as equally capable of spiritual enlightenment and leadership. Historical records show numerous female perfects traveling and spreading the Cathar message, often alongside men. This wasn't merely tolerance. It was an embrace of spiritual equality that stood in stark contrast to the patriarchal norms of the era. This equal standing was a direct consequence of their dualistic beliefs. Since the physical body was merely a vessel and inherently flawed regardless of gender, the soul within, the divine spark, was what truly mattered. Gender was a distinction of the material world, not the spiritual. Therefore, in the eyes of the good God, men and women were entirely equal. This empowering doctrine resonated deeply with many women who found intellectual and spiritual fulfillment denied to them elsewhere. This acceptance of female leadership presented a profound challenge to the church's hierarchical structure. But what did they preach from this position of equality? Was there a specific text guiding them, an alleged Cathar gospel? While the Cathars revered certain New Testament books, especially John, and parts of the Old Testament that spoke of a just and good God, excluding those attributed to the evil creator. There's long been speculation about an alleged Cathar gospel. This term refers not to a single, newly discovered text, but to the possibility that they either had their own unique version of existing gospels or a set of teachings that formed a distinct Cathar narrative. Many scholars believe their gospel was primarily an oral tradition passed down by the perfects, emphasizing spiritual purification and the duality of creation. They focused on passages that supported their asceticism and their view of Christ as a purely spiritual being. They would selectively interpret or reframe existing scriptures to fit their dualistic theology. One text sometimes associated with them is the Gospel of John. Its emphasis on light conquering darkness, on the Word becoming flesh in a spiritual sense, resonated deeply with Cathar beliefs. However, they interpreted it through their own unique lens, emphasizing the spiritual resurrection and de-emphasizing the physical. They essentially claimed ownership of John for their own theological purposes. The Church, in its fervor to suppress them, destroyed many of their writings, making it incredibly difficult to reconstruct their complete scriptural canon. This deliberate destruction fuels the mystery of what their specific gospel truly entailed. What is clear is that the Church perceived their interpretations and potential unique texts as an extreme danger, culminating in the creation of a terrifying new institution. The threat posed by the Cathars was so profound that it was the primary catalyst for the establishment of the Papal Inquisition. This institution was not just a judicial body. It was a sophisticated, state-sponsored system designed specifically for the systematic identification, prosecution, and elimination of heresy. The existing episcopal courts were deemed insufficient to handle the Cathar problem. The Inquisition introduced new methods of investigation, including secret denunciations, torture to extract confessions, and the presumption of guilt. Unlike secular courts, the accused had no right to legal counsel, and their identities of accusers were often withheld. This created an atmosphere of paranoia and terror designed to break communities that harbored heretics. Its operatives, primarily Dominican and Franciscan friars, were highly trained and dedicated. They traveled from town to town, rooting out suspected Cathars, often relying on local informants incentivized by rewards or threatened by excommunication. The sentences ranged from public penance and property confiscation to imprisonment and, most notoriously, burning at the stake. The efficiency and ruthlessness of the Inquisition were unprecedented. It effectively dismantled Cathar communities by instilling fear and forcing conversions or executions. The creation of such a powerful and terrifying apparatus underscores the immense perceived threat. No wonder their final stand would become legend, etched into the very stones of a mountain fortress. The castle at Montségur, perched dramatically atop a rocky spire in the Pyrenees, holds a legendary place in Cathar history. For years, it served as a refuge, a spiritual center, and a symbol of Cathar resistance against the relentless forces of the Church and the French crown. It became the final stronghold for many perfects and believers. In 1244, after a brutal 10-month siege, Montségur fell. The conditions of surrender offered the Cathars a choice: recant their faith or face the pyre. Refusing to abandon their beliefs, over 200 perfects walked willingly into a mass burning at the stake at the foot of the mountain. This act of collective martyrdom solidified their place in history. Yet a persistent legend surrounds Montségur's last days. It's rumored that just before the castle fell, a small group of Cathars secretly escaped, carrying with them a mysterious treasure. This wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more precious: sacred texts, relics, or perhaps even the mythical Holy Grail itself. Was Montségur merely a final, tragic stand against overwhelming odds, or was it a sacred vault, meticulously guarded to protect something vital from falling into enemy hands? This tantalizing question links the Cathars to one of history's most enduring mysteries. This connection to a legendary artifact continues to fuel whispers and theories. The mystery of Montségur's rumored treasure flows almost seamlessly into one of the most persistent legends of all time, the Holy Grail. While traditional Grail lore often connects it to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, some theories powerfully link the Cathars to its true identity or its safekeeping. The idea here isn't that the Cathars possess the actual chalice from the Last Supper. Instead, their Grail is often interpreted metaphorically. For some, it represents a secret lineage, perhaps the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, a concept famously explored in later esoteric traditions. For others, it symbolizes lost spiritual knowledge, a pure form of Christianity that the Cathars preserved. In this view, the Cathars were the true guardians of a spiritual essence, a divine light, which the Grail represents. Their dualistic beliefs and their focus on inner purity align with the idea of a spiritual, rather than physical, treasure. The escape from Montségur is then seen as the ultimate act of protecting this profound secret from falling into the hands of the evil material church. These theories, while speculative, have captivated imaginations for centuries, adding another layer of intrigue to the Cathar story. They imply that the Cathars were not just heretics, but keepers of an ancient truth, echoes of which can be found in even older spiritual movements. The parallels between Catharism and earlier forms of Gnostic Christianity are striking and point to a much older spiritual lineage. Gnosticism, which flourished in the early centuries AD, also embraced a radical dualism. The belief in an impure material world created by a lesser, evil god, the demiurge, and a good, transcendent god of light. Like the Cathars, Gnostics emphasized secret knowledge, gnosis, as the path to salvation. They believed this knowledge could liberate the divine spark trapped within the human body, allowing it to return to its true spiritual origin. They also often viewed Christ as a purely spiritual being, whose physical incarnation was an illusion, a doctrine known as Docetism. Both movements challenged the concept of a benevolent creator of the material world and sought to escape the cycles of reincarnation. Both groups considered themselves the true inheritors of Christ's teachings, while dismissing the emerging Orthodox Church as worldly and apostate. The similarities in their core tenets are too profound to ignore. This suggests that Catharism wasn't a sudden, isolated heresy, but rather a resurgence of very ancient spiritual ideas that periodically challenged established religious authority. Recognizing these echoes of Gnostic thought deepens our understanding of the Cathars, but also intensifies the question: why did the Church fear them so deeply, beyond mere doctrinal differences? The Church's fear of the Cathars went far beyond simple theological disagreement. It was an existential terror. Firstly, Catharism offered a complete, coherent alternative to medieval Christianity. It wasn't just questioning elements, it presented an entirely different path to salvation, with its own clergy, sacraments, and moral code. This threatened the Church's monopoly on spiritual authority. Secondly, their ascetic lifestyle and moral purity often contrasted sharply with the perceived corruption and wealth of the Catholic clergy. The Perfects lived lives of poverty and dedication, which resonated with many ordinary people disheartened by clerical abuses. This moral authority gave the Cathars immense popular appeal, drawing converts away from the mainstream. Finally, their dualism undermined the Church's very foundation. If the material world was evil, then the entire sacramental system, baptism, the Eucharist, holy relics, magnificent cathedrals, was rendered meaningless. If Christ wasn't truly physically incarnate, then the entire concept of the Passion and Resurrection, central to Christian salvation, was overturned. This was not a reform movement, it was a revolutionary movement that sought to dismantle the Church's power and teachings entirely. For the Church, tolerating Catharism meant suicide. The stakes were absolute, making their extermination seemingly necessary. But can such deep-seated ideas truly be extinguished forever? The systematic persecution of the Cathars was incredibly effective, leading to their apparent extinction by the 14th century. Their strongholds were razed, their scriptures burned, and their followers executed or forcibly converted. The visible movement vanished, leaving only a ghost in history. Yet the core ideas that fueled Catharism, radical dualism, the search for gnosis, the critique of worldly authority, and the yearning for spiritual purity are perennial. They are themes that appear in various forms throughout spiritual history, often in times of perceived moral decline or disillusionment with established institutions. Modern New Age movements, certain esoteric traditions, and even some contemporary critiques of materialism echo aspects of Cathar thought. While unlikely to reappear in their specific medieval form, the underlying questions they posed about the nature of good and evil, spirit and matter, and institutional corruption are timeless. The human desire for a more direct, purer spiritual path, unburdened by worldly institutions, remains powerful. Therefore, while the Cathars are a historical phenomenon, the spirit of their challenges to orthodoxy could always resurface in new guises. The question then becomes, who defines what is considered heresy, and why does that still matter today? The story of the Cathars is a stark reminder that heresy is not an inherent truth, but a label applied by those in power. In the medieval context, the Catholic Church held the unique authority to define orthodoxy, and anyone deviating from it was branded a heretic. This label was not just theological. It justified persecution, violence, and the ultimate destruction of entire communities. The power to define heresy is the power to control thought, to dictate acceptable belief, and to legitimize the suppression of dissent. It shapes not only religious practice, but also social order, political structures, and individual freedom. It draws lines in the sand, dividing the saved from the damned, the true believers from the enemies of God. Today, while direct ecclesiastical power to execute non-believers has largely diminished in the West, the impulse to define and condemn heresy still exists. It manifests in ideological purity tests, cancel culture, and the marginalization of dissenting voices in various spheres, from politics to science to social movements. The battleground may have shifted, but the fundamental dynamic remains. Understanding who defines heresy and the consequences of that definition is crucial because it speaks to the very heart of intellectual and spiritual freedom. The Cathars met a terrible end because they dared to offer a different answer. This historical lesson is a profound testament to the dangers of unchallenged authority and why we must always question the labels placed upon those who think differently. Make sure to subscribe for more religious videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next one.